Filtration is the movement of fluid out of the capillary and into the tissues, and reabsorption is the movement of fluid into the capillary from the tissues. This movement is dependent upon two forces. The first is hydrostatic pressure, which is the force exerted by a fluid on the wall of a vessel. Colloid osmotic pressure is the osmotic force created by the concentration gradient of proteins across the capillary wall. This causes the movement of water from the area of lower solute concentration to the area of higher solute concentration. These two forces oppose each other. Hydrostatic pressure is exerted by blood plasma on the inside of the capillary wall as well as by the interstitial fluid on the outside of the capillary wall. The difference between these two is the net hydrostatic pressure. Whichever is greater will determine the direction the fluid actually moves. Now, the accepted measure for interstitial fluid hydrostatic pressure is actually a negative pressure, which means a force that sucks fluid out of the capillary. The difference in the colloid osmotic pressure in the blood plasma and that of the interstitial fluid is called the oncotic pressure. Again, whichever is greater will determine the direction the fluid will move. These two forces also need to be compared to one another to determine net movement of fluid across a capillary wall. For example, if the arterial end of the capillary has a blood hydrostatic pressure of 30 millimeters of mercury and the interstitial fluid hydrostatic pressure is negative 3 millimeters of mercury, the net hydrostatic pressure would be 33 millimeters of mercury moving out of the blood and into the tissues. If the blood colloid osmotic pressure is 28 millimeters of mercury, and the interstitial fluid colloid osmotic pressure is 8 millimeters of mercury, then the oncotic pressure will be 20 millimeters of mercury moving into the blood from the tissues. So now we compare the forces moving out of the capillary to those moving into the capillary. We call that the net filtration pressure. If the number is positive, we have filtration, which is usually the case at the arterial end of the capillary where nutrients and oxygen are delivered to the tissues. However, at the venal end, the blood hydrostatic pressure falls significantly and becomes less than the oncotic pressure. The result is a negative net filtration pressure. This means fluid will move into the capillary from the tissues, which is called reabsorption.